welcome to the 75th IREPAS meeting trader session. The room isn't completely full yet, but usually punctuality was never a big asset in IREPAS meetings, so I still hope that some others will find the way down here. So, as usual and as practiced over the last years, SteelOrbis has sent questions or has asked the people who are attending here this meeting to send questions for the trader session, to have something to debate and to argue about, and to have some topics of mutual interest. So the first question which popped up was, not unexpectedly, protectionism and anti-dumping. The question was, anti-dumping measures in key markets, what consequences for world trade can the various anti-dumping cases create, and will trader wars become a reality? So obviously any trade barrier will be and have negative consequences for the trade, and forces that those tonnages have to find a home elsewhere. So they are creating pressure in other markets, and those markets will look for also building barriers so that their market will not be spoiled. So in the market with no domestic productions, it is obviously a good thing. However, in areas where domestic mills are vulnerable, in most instances protectionism measures will be implemented, which can be easily spiral of a trade war. So in our opinion, yes, sure, every anti-dumping case and every market or measurement is hindering that steel, in our case, is coming into a market, so it has to find a new home. And for us, as believers in a free trade and free market, I think at least those sitting here and probably sitting there are not in favor of any trade barriers. Anyone to share that opinion?
Well, actually, I'd like to add that anti-dumping is really, there's two ways that it works. If it's really used for countries that are actually really dumping or not playing fair, I think it's a good thing, because the local economies have to protect their own businesses. But then if it is done just to stop imports or create markets that is favorable to local producers, then definitely is not. So I know a few cases where they have come up with dumping duties that really don't make sense, and that's not real. And obviously that's a very bad thing. And I know a few cases where, I can't say the rate, but yeah, it was being dumped and it had to be stopped, and if it didn't, then you would really hurt your own economy there. And last thing I want to say on this one is, well, I think you haven't seen anything yet. Once, if Mr. Trump becomes the president, then you'll see much more of this going forward. I think this is something that he promises to do, and I'm afraid he's going to really do it in the U.S.
Any other comment from your side? If not, let's move over to the next question. Again, anti-dumping. Anti-dumping Rebar case against Turkey, Japan, and Taiwan. That is about 95% of total imports into the U.S. What happens next? Well done. Living in America, you're probably the right guy to answer that.
What happens is really, this is basically a delayed tactic. Turks have already proved that they're not dumping, so the margins are extremely low. So chances are they are going to prove that they really are not dumping. So it will take a long time, because this whole thing takes about a year or probably longer. So the trade will be basically interrupted for that long. So After that, I think if it's played fairly, then the dumping margins will come close to zero, and life will go on. So this is really a temporary hold, at least for Turkey. I don't know about Japan, although I noticed that the alleged dumping rate is huge. So it's kind of strange that they can come up with 200%, if I'm not mistaken. It's not real, but that means that they're going to find something at the end. And if they're also defended like the Turks case, then it may come down to zero as well. Meanwhile, we're going to look at the other countries that is not in the anti-dumping region. There's not that many countries left, but most of the Europe zone. So this is going to help the European producers for another year before this thing is over.
Any comment from your side? Okay, then we move on to the next question. Tom, if you...
Sure. Next question's related to China and square bar, or what we all really know as billet. The recent clampdown on export of square bars from China has temporarily reduced dramatically the exports of steel square bars. Is China really looking to reduce export of square bars, which raise less issue with importing countries around the world and do not risk anti-dumping action? Or will they substitute that with increased exports of finished products which may face additional new anti-dumping action? I mean, my first thoughts on this is that China doesn't really care about square bar export or not. It's such a small proportion of China's overall steel production, and it's a bit of a red herring. There is a conflict with the rebate and the duty on export of billet, which was reduced to 20% now, and ultimately we expect to see over the next year or two that the rebates will be removed, as will the duty on exports. And the clampdown, I don't really think there's been a clampdown so much as increased buying activity domestically in China, and export isn't their key focus. I think overall export of square bar or steel billet from China has been good for most of the world in terms of providing alternative sources for re-rollers in Turkey, re-rollers in Egypt, the Middle East, and I expect it to continue to some extent.
There were some discussions yesterday on the billets, or I should say the bars, less than 150 millimeter will be barred by the Chinese government. Number one, is that correct?
There've been so many rumors and chatter about what the government may or may not do, whether that's the Chinese government or the Tangshan region, which is where most of the billet's been exported from. They keep talking about it and nothing happens.
Because the reason why I said it is I heard that there's 135 already been imported, and you can find as much as you want. So that 150 limitation is probably not there, at least not yet.
The difference between the 130 and the 120s and the 150s is that the 150s were generally being exported as concast billet, and yet a lot of the 130s and 120s were actually rolled, and therefore officially, according to the customs, are really genuine square bar as opposed to billet, despite the fact that their onward use is, of course, for re-rolling rather than as a bar itself.
And I think some of the mills are also quite innovative in switching documents and chemistries and sizes and so on. So someone has to test it.
Adding chrome to just a very small proportion rather than the full parcel.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Does anyone have a different view about China and billet or square bar? And the other thing to say is, despite the fact that China hasn't been particularly active in the export market over the last 2 or 3 months, up until, first half of the year, China was the second biggest exporter of billet to Turkey, larger than Ukraine and smaller than Russia, so over 1 million tons, which for a 6 million, 7 million ton market is a pretty big share.
Yeah, but can they continue to compete on the prices? Because I think the prices from the Black Sea will be more competitive than those from China in the very short term.
Well, the reason why Black Sea prices haven't collapsed is because Chinese prices increased, and a lot of tonnage that would otherwise have tried to find a home in the Mediterranean ended up in the Middle East and in Asia.
The difference is the Black Sea billets. If you go back and try to buy 500,000 tons of billets from Black Sea, that price that you see is going to go up dramatically. So yes, you're right. The prices today are just as competitive as the Chinese, but if the demand really picks, in other words, if the production goes from the scrap to billet again, I don't think you can get enough CIS billet into the country, so, or the prices will go up.
I'm not so sure, actually, because I think that with the actual scrap prices, even some big scrap dealers which themselves own some steel mills will prefer to sell billets than scrap, unless the scrap is going up again. But if some people, from what I heard today, still believe it will go below 200. And, well, okay, I mean, I'm not dealing in scrap, so I have no advantage to say something or to go short or long. Some people estimate it will still go below 200, and then the billet price in the Black Sea, because today the differential between scrap and billet price is more than interesting enough for them to produce billets instead of selling scrap.
I think we should come back to that topic in the next, after we finish all this, because it's a very interesting subject, what you're talking about. And I'd like to hear everybody's opinion on it.
So, coming to the next question, again, China. How compatible is China's intention to reduce production of steel with their goal to maintain a GDP growth of 5.7 to 6% per annum? Well, in a nutshell, they are not compatible. But on the other side, I think we also have to question ourselves, do we believe those figures which are being spread around, whether it's 5%, 6%, and what was the GDP growth really the last years? I think nobody can really know that. And so to stimulate the market, what was declared in the beginning of the year, to stimulate the market is of course difficult with overcapacities all around, and of course with this overcapacity to reduce those capacity or to cut them, of course many jobs are also at risk, and I think this is a quite difficult job to do, which anyone knows in a small country or in a small area like maybe Europe, how difficult it is to reduce capacities and then just transfer this to by far the biggest producer on this planet Earth. So it's definitely a job to do. And what is also to be considered is that we are not only having public-owned companies which are belong to the states and to the government, but you have also a huge amount of privately owned mills, and nobody has an idea how to handle that. So you cannot just tell the guys, please, we have overcapacity, you close your shop. Okay, he may close the shop, but what to do with all the workers? A whole city is depending on this mill, and we are talking about mills which are producing millions of tons. It's not like small Italian valley producers with 500,000 tons. It's massive. It's 5 million, 6 million, 10 million tons, to say the least. So, yeah, this is...
Also, when we saw the Chinese mills under extreme pressure in October and November last year, and a lot of them losing money, we saw some mills stopping. But as soon as prices came back up again, of course, they all restarted with new finance, new support.
Yeah.
Well, this morning I tried to attract the attention on Mr. Li Xinchuan's speech. They always talk about capacity reduction. The fact is, they are working with 70%, of the capacity. So even if they reduce the capacity, it means really not much. The key thing that we have to pay attention is production, the reduction in production, because it's a fact that their consumption is going down. In fact, he himself told us that their consumption went down 3.6%, and their projection for 2030 is the consumption is going to go down almost 30%. Well, if the consumption is going down, and even if you reduce the capacity, if you do not reduce the production, then you're going to have a serious problem, which means you have to have extra material that you have to export. So this production deduction is always omitted when they give the conversations or when they give out the press releases. But what we have to concentrate is what do they do on their production? Because the net effect to us right now is if their consumption is going down, then we hope that the production is going down with it. In free market economies, that's what happens.
But that is not what happened the last few months, because they even produced more.
Yeah.
So it was just the contrary. They produced more, and I think if you remember the speech of the person of the Commerzbank, he said that it's impossible, I'm not saying production, but to close down capacity in China, at least with the state-owned mills.
Yeah.
Because local governments will continue support, and as long as they can finance it, they will do. So unless they get financial problems, I think they will not reduce capacity. I'm not saying production, I'm saying capacity.
Yeah. Well, like I say, if bringing capacity down does not necessarily mean bringing production down. I mean, when they bring the capacity down, they took out a lot of really old, very old mills that shouldn't be working, and they're not working economically anyway. So when they take those out, that doesn't really change anything to the rest of the world. And they're improving their efficiency. I think Mr. Li Xinchuan was proudly telling us that they're improving their efficiencies. The consumption is going down, but these are all negative news for all of us, because that means there will be more steel available that's coming for exports, because there's no other place to go.
Yep, please. Just a second, you will get a microphone.
Talking about capacity and the reduction of capacity in Chinese mills, how many tons do you think effectively reduced between among what was cancelled and what was brought up more in China? Because there are some mills, when the prices trend up, they reproduce again and they increase their capacity, as far as we know. Now, how many tons you think from beginning of 2016 till now was effectively reduced in China among the 800 million tons that they produce, and how much that would affect the export, if we are talking of export?
Well, they were saying that they consume about 702 million tons.
Declared.
So if they produce...
Officially.
Yeah, domestic consumption.
Consumption.
Yeah. So if they produce 800 million tons and their consumption is only 702 million tons, then there's 100 million tons that goes into the export market. Now, if their consumption is going down, which is what they're predicting, rightfully, that means that if they do not reduce the production much further or equal, then you're going to have even more pressure coming from China on the products.
In China, as far as we hear, there are two figures. One declared figure, which is about 800 million,
Right.
and so many people in China talk about undeclared figures, which is about that amount to about 850 to 870 million. There is about 50 to 70 million tons non-declared in the rural area in China, making a total that was confirmed or declared by several big Chinese state or semi-state trading companies. Now, if we talk effectively of that, which is about 800, let's say minimum of 850,000 tons, how many tons do you think was actually reduced in China starting January 2016 to date?
Again, I work with his figures, and he was saying that their consumption is 700 million tons. So if they have 850 million tons of production, that means there's an 850 million tons of material that has to be exported. So, but keep in mind, it's a very complicated and very difficult gauging, because when you say 50 million tons is probably not documented, but there's some consumption is probably not documented as well. So it's, I totally sympathize with the Chinese government. It is not as easy as we all sit here and say, reduce, reduce. It's not that easy. You know, it's very difficult for them to just, you know, control the production, because they shouldn't anyway. If they want a free market and they want to be market economy, government shouldn't be doing that anyway. It should be supply demand. If there's a demand, they're going to produce.
But okay, we're always talking big figures, but if you look that you're talking about 720 and 800, this is meaning 10% is going more or less for export.
Yeah.
Which country is not exporting 10% of its steel production?
Right. Well,
It's not, I mean, it's huge in real figures, but in percentage, European mills,
relation, it's
they
not that
are
big,
also
no.
exporting 10% of their production, if not more.
But I remember,
Right? That's okay.
I remember in one of the last IREPAS, the person from the China, what's this? Yeah, he mentioned the capacity in China of 1.2 billion tons. That is a capacity they can produce, in theory, if everything runs 100%.
now they're saying 1 billion.
And now they say 1 billion, so that means probably they scrapped some 200 million, but also
No official figures.
This is probably also not the case.
Well, never believe Chinese figures. Huh?
No, again, capacity is such a
Sorry for some Chinese people, maybe
vague
in the
number.
meeting room, but
I'm sorry.
yeah.
I'm sorry. Capacity is such a vague thing. When you talk about capacity, you know, I mean, every mill, when they come out, they say, I can produce 1 million tons. In reality, they can never produce more than 700,000 tons. So this capacity thing is overrated. But yeah, they did reduce dramatically, and by taking out the old-fashioned mills that I've seen mills, literally, people are shoveling coal in heating their furnaces. Literally, I've seen this. And this is just recent.
Any comment? Okay, let's move on to the next question. Do you think it is possible China will not be granted market economy status at the end of this year, given its rising exports and number of trade measures against the country? If yes, what would be its impact? So, anyone to comment on that?
Well, the market economy it has nothing to do with how much you export.
I think it's not going to change anything. I mean, maybe the trade measurements will become a bit more difficult for European producers. Anti-dumping cases eventually will become a bit more difficult, but also it's not the end of the world. So I think it will not really have severe impact. Anyone having a different opinion or just share it with us?
I see Mr. Shirwan's assistant here. You can comment. And
This lady?
yeah. I mean, it's okay to comment, you know. Do you want to comment some? Do you wish to comment?
She, the lady?
Yeah.
Do you want to comment on what we have said about the status? No? Okay.
No comments.
One thing I think maybe not so clear. Actually,
Just a second, you will get a microphone so that everyone can.
So only one thing I'm not agree is I think cut down capacity is not what government should do. It should be what the market do. As far as we know, last year the price keeps going down. So many Chinese mills bankrupt. I think it's a good thing. I think everything should handle to the market, not government. But this year you can see the market again increase. So many dead mills, they come back to the market again. So I think we should not blame Chinese governments. It's just market situation. That's it.
That is true, actually. What you're saying is very true. I mean, when they did not get the help and they were let down and they did go bankrupt. And that's how the capacities went out of, you know, like when you talk about huge capacity, like 200 million, 100 million, it all went out because they went bankrupt and the government didn't help them out. You're right.
Well, actually, the Chinese mills, especially the private-owned mills, it's very hard for them to get money from the bank. It's very hard, and I don't know you know it or not. The interest from a bank, for the private steel mills, is very, very high. So,
What do you call high? I'm just curious.
the interest, I mean, the interest to borrow the money from the bank
Yeah,
is
but
very
how
high
much-
for the
how much-
steels.
What does mean high? Is it 4%, 5%, 10%?
I think Mr. Salim knows it's very high for them.
5%. That's high? Okay.
So I don't think it is governments helping them. I think it's markets helping them because it can make more money from that. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much.
It was heard that these private Chinese mills, they founded other mills in the name of other new mushrooming mills, where they were borrowing, let's say, hiring, borrowing, whatever you may call it, money in other names at a higher interest rate when the markets were going up. At that moment, there's nothing called bankruptcy, whatever it is, over in China. We've been living there 40 years in China. Bankruptcy doesn't exist. Freezing, it exists. You know, they go freezed 3, 4, 6 months. Whenever they have the chance or hear of any boom or uptrend in the market, they go through that way, this way, and they hire the money, as the lady was saying. In other names, maybe. In other projects, probably. But it ends up to be coming to the same mill again, where they go and they produce again. So what it has been discussed, I believe, it's personal thinking. What I believe of reducing, they reduced production, not capacity. Production was reduced, I believe, since beginning of between what was reduced and what was increased, the net figure is about 25 to 30 million tons down. 25 to 30 million tons compared to their intention or program to export 125 million tons. It is 25%, but what is 25% compared to this number with the traded quantity all over the world, other than China? Still, they can find a way to sell, I don't know if you agree with me, to sell at least at the $60 to $70 less than anybody else.
Well, the fact that they can sell $60, $70 less than the other economies means that they must have some kind of help. Otherwise, how can they do it?
You may call it help, you may call it needing of foreign currency. This is a fact. What we can translate, the means for that is another issue. But to say of the social problem, yes, there will be a social problems. We have seen in China last year, not last, because 2 quarters back, the situation was good. Before that, in 2015, when 2 major private mills freezed, let's say, and the labor was standing at the gate of City Hall asking for their money, that was not an easy issue. We've seen it in 3 cities in China.
Let me tell you, the positive thing that I see in this one is, number one, the Chinese government is now sensitive to the capacity issue or production issue. They're sensitive to environmental issues. So I think Mr. Lee was kind of right. You can't solve this thing overnight. It's going to take time. But at least everything is brought to their attention. I think they want to solve this, but this is not going to go away that fast. You know, so even the bankruptcies, like you said, the factory is there, everything is there, and if they don't have the money, they're not going to run it. But once it becomes, you know, manageable again, they're going to run it again.
But China's in no way unique in having some kind of state support to rescue steel mills that get into trouble. We've seen it all across the world since 2008. We've seen it in Europe, we've seen it in Russia, we've seen it in the United States.
That's true.
It's the only problem that everyone has with China is the absolute number, that it's so big. And back to the 120 million export or 130 million export or whatever you want to call it, reducing it by 10% or 20% will have no meaningful impact on the rest of the world. But it's a perfectly normal and rational government action to step in to stabilize a company that's going through temporary financial difficulty.
Exactly. What's the 10% here? What's the 10% in any other place? This is the major issue.
He still doesn't answer the question if China will become a
market economy.
Yeah. We did.
Eventually, it will. And I don't see a big, resistance. What's the point? Maybe it's possible to do it.
Any other comment on that? Yeah?
This question cannot be answered because it relates to political regime. We are not here to discuss the politics of China. We are discussing economy and steel. If you talk this, it's not a commercial issue at the end of the line.
Yeah.
It's a political issue, and we are not able, because nobody can judge what would be going there in 1, 2, 10 years. So whether it's becoming a market economy or not, I don't believe anybody, even at a higher level of politicians, can or is allowed, let's say, to talk about it formally.
Very true.
So this question is really no answer on it.
We had quite a lively discussion about this yesterday evening, that over the last 40, 50 years, we've been perfectly happy to allow whole industries to be outsourced to China and Asia. But suddenly now with the steel industry, we have a big problem with it, If they can produce it more cost effectively than we can, then,
That's true.
Yeah. All right, let's move over to the next question. What do you think of the proposed merging by big Chinese steel companies? How do you think it will affect the capacity reduction strategy? I think we have almost covered that point already on the last question, so let's pause that. When looking into Rebar futures prices at Shanghai Future Exchange, we could notice that rebar futures prices hit its high level in late August. After that, rebar future prices have indicated an overall downtrend in September, though seeing signs of rebounding since September 19th. The movement in future market has exerted an evident influence on rebar prices on the spot market. Do you think there is a relevance between future market and spot market?
I hope so.
I hope so. Yeah. I would also say so. Yeah, whatever that trend may say. But
When I hear some Chinese mills talking, when the future market is going up, prices are going up. But when the future market is going down, this is paper. It's not a steel.
Yeah, but the problem with the rebar futures market, if the purpose of a futures market is to provide a benchmark price to allow market participants to hedge their risks, the rebar futures market in Shanghai doesn't fulfill that purpose because it's so volatile and so heavily influenced by people effectively gambling. And yeah, it doesn't really have a direct correlation with the spot market, whether it's going up or down, at least in what we see. I don't know if anyone else agrees or disagrees.
Right, except for it's not government, it's big Chinese mills basically do the speculations on it.
Sure, and individual investors, I think.
Right.
anyone to comment on that?
So empirically, the correlation between the Chinese futures and spot steel, whether it's rebar or billet, has actually been quite good. If you run the correlations against a range of long products on a month-to-month basis, that you get correlations of sort of 90 plus, which is about as good as you get in commodity markets.
I was more referring to the daily swing and how volatile it is than if you take a monthly average, you know.
Yeah. So I guess if you're looking for a day-to-day or intraday move, I mean, to get that much volatility in a day, I'm sure you don't see it in the real steel world. But the purpose, I suppose, of futures markets is to manage risk not on an intraday basis, but on a month-to-month or a sort of budget planning horizon. So if people could use the Shanghai Rebar futures, which outside of China they don't, it might actually be a reasonable proxy for managing exposure of long steel products. Now that point is more of a counterpoint because it's purely theoretical, because no one outside of China can actually trade on these contracts effectively.
If there's such high correlation, I think it's worth to look at it. Then you can really sit down and make decisions on that. I mean, you're talking about seriously high correlation between the actual and the futures. It's very interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, the catch is to trade in China, and that's if you want to trade on the exchange, you have to be executing from a Chinese account. And so for us non-Chinese folks, that's the challenge, and I suppose that's what the LME has done in introducing the rebar as a cash-settled future, would be as an alternative to those in the West who can't access the Shanghai contract directly.
Thank you very much. Was an eye-opener.
Yeah, interesting.
So, coming to the next question on raw materials. The Ukraine has tripled the export tax for scrap. Would this decision have a significant effect on Turkey's imports of scrap? And continued with billets versus scrap for an electric arc furnace and electric arc versus blast furnace in terms of production costs. Who do you like for the next 6 months? Who can comment on that one? Tom.
Well, I think at least for the time being, it's cheaper for Turkish mills to import scrap than to import billets. So as long as this will last, they will have not too much problems to buy sufficient scrap whenever they need it, because the billet price today is too expensive compared to the scrap prices.
And Ukraine is not the main source for scrap to Turkey anyway.
It's the States in other European countries.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think Ukraine's a particularly big supplier
No,
at all.
so Ukraine can triple,
do you know the data?
quadruple, it makes no difference.
How much Ukraine exports? Yeah,
It's nothing. So it really is not going to make a whole lot of difference whatever the Ukraine does. But of course, like Francis is saying, if the scrap prices go further down, then then life will be quite different. Or if the billet prices go even further, then that may change the whole equation.
So coming to the second part of the question, do you rather prefer to be an owner of an electric arc furnace mill or a blast furnace mill? So what do you think?
We traders do want to own nothing.
No, of course not. But
None of them.
what would you like to have more?
Well, really, the question should be, in this day and age, which one is more favorable, or which one has an advantage of cost advantage over the other. And obviously, with the iron ore prices being so low, blast furnaces do have an advantage over scrap. So as long as and you saw the figures this morning, that the 4 major iron ore producers all are going to increase. They're going to increase their production, 3 to 5, some of them even 15%. If they continue increasing their production, that means the iron ore prices have no chance to go any higher, which means the blast furnaces will have a definite advantage over the scrap. Luckily, though, if we're talking about rebar, majority of the rebar that we trade in is made from the electric arc furnace. So that's why the scrap price does matter for us.
That is depending really on the origin, because
Right.
in Turkey this is absolutely the case, but in China it's the contrary. Yeah? And as China is getting more and more anti-dumping measures in a number of countries, not talking even about homologation for DBAs, which is still another story, I think those countries where there is no local production, for example, especially certain African countries, the pressure will become bigger and bigger with Chinese prices coming from iron ore compared to Turkish prices, which are mainly produced out of scrap. Of course, we have to see to where the coking coal is going also.
Sure.
Because this last week it increased from 80 to 220, which is meaning when you have 0.4, 0.5 ton per ton of steel of coking coal, this is an increase from nearly $50, $60 in the cost price only from raw material.
Yeah.
Strange word.
Yeah. Well, the majority of the producers, at least for the U.S., is scrap base, and for Turkey is scrap base. And today, again, on the presentation, we saw that the Chinese 90% is iron ore base. So it's very small.
Anyone to comment on that? Okay. Coming to the next question, Brexit. How do you think the market trends will change after finalization of Brexit? For example, as far as it is known, United Kingdom's biggest supplier have been EU countries, but now there will be different trade arrangements between EU countries and UK. Who will benefit and what will be the place of China? Seriously, to comment on that question, I think it's way too early. Nobody has a clue of when it will be finalized.
If it will ever be finalized.
If ever it will be finalized. And I think from at least what we hear around is nobody is really having an interest to cut all trade relations between Europe and Britain. I think nobody will implement a new import tax or
God knows what. Anyway, that would be this is surely not going to happen.
I think it's of course the British will try to keep as much of advantages they have right now, but trying to avoid the disadvantages they had being an EU member, but still.
The question in my mind is, there's certain anti-dumping measures already in place for Europe zone. So when the British become independent outside of the zone, how will they're going to have to really file every one of them from scratch?
Yeah, but I think this is still a long time to go, because I'm sure this is not on a priority list of the negotiations.
I understand, but from my point of view,
then you're talking we start officially negotiation. I heard 1st January 2017. In fact, an old prime minister, Belgian prime minister, has been nominated as delegation leader. So I think they have other things to settle before they're going to talk about anti-dumping and other stories. And okay, the steel industry will certainly push to keep the anti-dumping. Yeah?
But the thing
on the products where they are now, or to add even.
But with the UK, the homologation as it is already protects the market, irrespective of anti-dumping or European legislation.
How many Chinese mills have the homologation for CARES?
2?
No,
3.
more.
Is it more now?
3 or 4.
3 or 4. 3 or 4.
That's enough.
But they are dumped.
Yeah, but they have
they are
anti-dumping. Yeah?
But that anti-dumping will have to be lifted, or will not be effective, because it's a new country now. Anti-dumping is for European.
not yet.
We're an independent country now. We're just part of the EU.
Don't forget, it is the tariff code for the anti-dumping on Chinese rebars is only for the UK for the moment, not for the other European countries. I'm not talking about homologation, which is still another story. But
I didn't know that.
That is the case.
Yeah, but even if they would be leaving the European community, what they can say is we are associating to the territory of Europe, like the Norwegians have done. That literally everything which is dumped in Europe is also dumped in Norway, although they are not a member of the European community.
Okay.
I think so. It's the case.
I does not agree with you, because, for example, you have if you make a product out of Chinese wire rods, which normally bears 24.5% anti-dumping duty in Europe, and you send them to Norway, you don't pay the 24.5%.
I think.
You understand what I mean?
Yeah. You mean
I think there's a gentleman who wants to have a comment.
To Norway, you don't pay a penny.
I was told.
There's a gentleman who wants to have a comment.
No, actually, Mr. Francis is right. Norway is out. And in principle, speaking about the UK, it's European anti-dumping measure applied for a tariff code for high-fatigue rebars, which are only used in the UK. So it's actually EU regulation. So in principle, theoretically speaking, if the UK exits the European Union, that means this regulation is out and they're unprotected. So this is a special tariff code which they applied because we know why, that there was not enough volume. Speaking about the Norway, they're independent, this same European economical zone, but they have their own. So in principle, they like to allocate the same same duties as the European Union, except, for example, you have the case with this pre-stressed wire, where it's dumped in Europe, but not dumped in Norway, so they are quite free to use that. The same applies for Iceland, which is also, depending on their own, but they don't have the production there, so they're free to import it anywhere. I hope it's clear.
But okay, this is not huge volumes, but it's the case.
Yesterday, I just wanted to bring another subject. We were discussing about CARES being a major prohibitive, trade prohibitive in material, actually rebar coming into England, but from what I understand is any country that really imports with the CARES homologation have to go through a major obstacles or difficulties to get one. And last thing is the importers, the importer, the traders have to be also CARES certified, which I find extremely strange.
I can agree with you on that one, but I can also comment on our case. For example, in the region where I come from, it's Baltic states. We have a different way that, any importer, any trader can be uncertified, and then you have this whole things around the VAT scams and so on. So there's two ways. But you're totally right that in principle, CARES is controlling the process from the production until you install it in the construction site. That's both wise, the threat and the opportunity there.
But this is only CARES doing that. Huh?
That's only CARES.
All the others, in Belgium, for example, Vienna, you have to pay for each and every ton, but that's just to make the engineering firm rich. It has nothing to do with control about quality. Okay, they control the quality of the producing mill, but if as trader you are selling Vienna material, you have to pay €1 or something like that, depending. To this engineering firm, which is coming every 6 months to see, just to count how many tons you sold, not to check if what you sold was completely according to Vienna. Okay, they can see that you sell from a mill which has been Viennaized, so which has the Vienna, but it's just trying to make some additional money. And from what I heard yesterday from the gentlemen here around the table, is that CARES is plenty of cash. So they need to spend money and to make even more regulations.
But actually, not a lot of people know that CARES for traders or for resellers or stockers are not mandatory. They treated the market as a commercial issue.
Yeah.
It's not mandatory. It's mandatory for the producers, but it's not mandatory for the traders, but all...
No, it's mandatory.
Actually, I haven't found it written nowhere. It's mandatory for producers, for cotton benders, but not for the traders.
According to CARES, since 2016, end of 2015, it is obligatory that a trader has to have a CARES homologation before he is allowed to sell from a CARES producer to a CARES fabricator.
But that's CARES system, not the governmental.
CARES system.
Yeah, so in principle, if you want to sell CARES production, you have to be certified by CARES, but not like, have this governmental homologation that you have to be there. That's only to follow the CARES, yes?
Yes.
That is to follow CARES, yeah. So for traceability and stuff like that, so that you tell them exactly how you are tracing the producer and if a label is missing and your mill test certificate and stuff like that. So the trader has to be approved.
Next thing you know, it's going to be the trucker, and the vessel has to be approved as well.
The captain of
That could be likely.
the captain.
Actually, I'm going to propose the same thing to Norway, which you were speaking on in 2 weeks in the Norwegian Steel Association, because there's another issues going on regarding that. Too much traders, or actually not the traders, but the companies which get steel from anywhere, trading off and messing up the market, and which no traceability in between the mill and the local user. So that's why it was an interesting topic out there.
The free market really weeds them out. Those people do not survive. It's a temporary thing. I mean, if you're not a good trader, you probably will be out of business very fast. So really, those things that you hear is really not the norm. They do eventually whizzle out.
I think it's too much, and it's at least from the customers I'm talking to. They think it's like a perpetuum mobile, which is moving on and on and on, makes it more difficult every time, because everything has to be traced, everything has to be checked, massive control, time-consuming, extremely bureaucratic, and so on and so forth. And the people say, well, we want to cut and bend our rebars, but we do not want to stay in the port for a week with someone to count on each and every bundle whether the labels is missing. Yeah, I mean, a label is always eventually missing, so we fix it, but there is a rolling mark on there. So, for Christ's sake, what else do we do? Yeah, the mill test certificate for this, for that. Huge reports you have to do at the end of the year with training, with this, with that. You have to document. You have to look into the future. What is your next aim to improve your performance, and how to rank the happiness of your customers. Have you done a good job? How to improve the job for your customers? So it's very bureaucratic, and is losing a little bit its ground from being just a company checking that the rebar has a good quality. So it's becoming self-efficient.
Yes, that's true. That's too much over the basic round.
Yeah. And I had a customer lately who said, well, actually, CARES is a better weapon than any anti-dumping, because they really can squeeze people out. Next is environmental issues, sustainability, and carbon footprint, and it's massive. And if you are a trader who just want to ship 10,000 tons in a year to a market or whatever, this is too much work. You don't do that.
Well, at the end, I think, you as traders, it's your duty to work with your governments or your organizations to get yourself out of unnecessary regulations. You really have to be fighting with that every day. Otherwise, as traders, you will not have a whole lot of chance, because the domestic producers will basically govern, and they'll put any obstacle that they can find so that you traders cannot just move in. So it's your duty to really work with your organizations and your government bodies to really undo those unnecessary barriers, which, believe me, in the US we do.
I mean, the biggest barrier we have already in Europe is that we have 26 or 27 homologations in 28 countries. The banana was, we had an EU law that the banana must have an angle of X%, or the cucumber. But on rebars, there is no interest from any side to put one urinal.
Well, I think there is an interest, but again, the industry is working against it. They're working since 4 years or 5 years on a euro now.
Longer, 25 years. 25 years.
Okay.
There is a euro norm, actually. There is a euro norm, but
today have regular meetings to establish a euro norm, but of course there is not one single European producer who has interest in a single euro norm.
No. Because then all these certification bodies will lose a big part of their job. All of them. One will remain.
Well, you guys do not, In the US, we have no such thing. ASTM is basically self-governed, You can, as long as you just produce it accordingly, it's your declaration that counts. There will be nobody else checking it, except for your customer. So if you do not produce the right thing next time, they're not going to buy from you. That's the end of it. So market solves it rather than there's another body
I
that
will
gets in.
put it extreme. You sell debars as traded to construction company, and they build the bridge, and the bridge collapse.
Right. Then
Do you have product responsibility
Yes.
then in the States?
Of course.
Okay.
Of course. They will sue you, your grandpa, anybody they can find that has money. Yeah. There is definitely liability. Liability doesn't go away. In fact, that's the...
But
that's,
it's not checked. That's
No.
what you said.
No. It's the customers, your customer has the obligation to verify, and if your customer trusts you, that means they trust that you are checking. In fact, the very fact that we survive in our industry is we have, engineers that actually go and check and verify, so they really want to buy material that is produced to standard. They come to a few traders who know what they're doing. So it's self-governed, and I think that's the best way.
Yeah, but it's very interesting that one of the biggest industrial nations is not having a homologation procedure.
No.
Yeah. And I mean, we also see in Europe that beams, for example, you can build a bridge out of beams. Yeah, for beams, regardless of where they are coming from, you just need a CE sign, and that's it. Yeah, so no homologation, no procedures, no nothing.
Which is more critical than the
Which
other
is,
one.
of course,
Yeah.
it's much more critical. All right, coming to the next point. Are the Iranian exporters getting more active in the market? Does anyone...
Is anybody here working with Iran?
Well, actually, I've asked my people in Lugano, and they said for long products, really, we haven't seen them at all. On flat rolled, yeah, there were some activities also on billets, but on long products like rebars, wire rods, actually.
I heard they were selling billets to Turkey last 3-4 months ago. I don't know what it is.
So next point, have the minimum import price system in India been negative or positive for the global market?
Depends on what the minimum import price is. If it is a very high price, then it doesn't make sense. What is it? Does anybody know what's the minimum import price system, how it works in India? And did you know anything about it?
I think it's 20%.
No,
It's hurting all the exporters, though.
go ahead and...
I think it's about 20%. Between 15 to 30% is the range. And it's hurting all the people who buy the hot roll coil and re-roll it into, for export.
20% of what?
Of the import price is the difference which makes the minimum.
But is it not a fixed...
It's a fixed thing.
Fixed, not percentage,
Yeah,
but a fixed amount.
Yes.
And I understood that there is a possibility that if you re-export, that you can get a license or whatever to. This is like I call it toilet rumors. I have no proof of that, but I heard it's
all the associations are really upset, the export associations, because they are hurting. They can't export the tension bars and the fabricated steel items because of this minimum duty. And it's being lobbied in the government every day. The mills want it there because they can increase their price. They're local mills. But
So-
the export lobby is trying to kick it out.
So what's like minimum import price of rebar? Do you have any idea?
I think there is hardly any rebar import, isn't it?
Main is the hot roll coils from
Okay, what's
And
the,
wire rod. And wire rod.
what's the, do you have any idea, like, so we can understand if it makes sense or not?
There is someone who wants to comment?
Okay. On the very back.
Thanks. There are two sets of duties. The gentleman was referring to 15 to 20%. Those are safeguard duties.
A little bit louder, please.
Those are safeguard duties that he was talking about, 20%. But there's a minimum import price, which for hot roll coils, for example, is 455 CNF. And nobody is allowed to import cargo below that price. So even if you buy it at 435, it's not that you can pay the difference in duty. It's just not allowed to import anything which is invoiced at less than 455. And then on top of that, there's a safeguard duty of 20%, 22% for almost all steel items. And you're also right that if you're exporting, then it's not considered an import practice. You're allowed to import duty-free as long as you're exporting. But you've got to export first. You must have exported something, then you get something called an advance license, which shows that you've exported these goods and therefore you're allowed to import the raw materials for this export.
To be clear, if the price is 455, you still pay 20% at the top of that?
Yes.
Whoa. So really you can't import?
You can't import unless you're an exporter. And so now the problem the exporters have is that they go to export first and then import. And it's not that you can import first and then export.
So everybody has their own deal going on.
Free trade.
Free trade.
Really,
Free trade. Yeah, that actually was the last question. The final and last one is always what are the prices going to do? So where do we see the price in the next month or two? Let's say towards end of this year, going up, going down, stable. The well-known question, and I would like to see your opinions on that.
Can we divide it into two?
Yeah.
One is, let's first ask the audience, let's say, put a benchmark, like, let's say, first talk about scrap, and then maybe we can talk about rebar in general. Yeah. On the scrap price, what do you think the price is going to be? At today's level, you already know, I don't want to give a number, but you know what today's level is. Do you expect in the next 3 months for the scrap to go a little below, substantially below, or higher? So maybe we can ask one at a time.
No, you can just put his hands up.
Okay,
raise hands
up.
Same. Who would think that the price of scrap in the next 3 months will be around the numbers that we are hearing today? Well, 2 votes.
Will be down.
Who thinks that the price will be slightly down than what it is today? And who thinks that the prices are substantially lower than today? Okay, then the rest must be thinking the price is going to go up. That's good to know. Well, let's ask it too. How many of you think that the prices will be higher than today's level, slightly higher than today's level in the next 3 months?
2.
And very much higher? 1. Okay. Well, it's...
and down?
Well, down was slightly lower. I think the majority thinks that it's going to be slightly lower. I personally think that without giving a number, there is a minimum price of scrap that I know the U.S. scrap dealers will basically carry it. When the price level went down to where it was last year, January or December, many of the scrap dealers in the U.S. did not want to carry it anymore because it just didn't make sense for them to collect, to process and ship because they were losing money. Lately, I read an article in Wall Street Journal about the ships dismantling in India, where majority of the dismantling facilities were losing money because they were not they were buying vessels. They had bought vessels thinking the price would be much higher, and the prices went down. So there's a number below which it is not commercially viable for, again, I'm talking about US scrap dealers to collect and sell. So when the prices went down to a certain level that we were talking about, most of them did not participate. So when China stopped deliveries of their billets, and the majority of the electric arc furnace mills wanted to go buy scrap because it made sense with those numbers, they couldn't find enough scrap, which is the reason why the scrap jumped dramatically to numbers that also didn't make sense. So then it went back to a correction, and it came to a number that was sustainable. So there is a number that below which the scrap does not make sense.
Yeah, but you're talking now only American scrap, huh?
That's the only one I know.
No, but it's not, I don't blame you for that, but I mean, you have to reckon, especially out of Europe, also with the volatility of the dollar.
Yeah.
Can you tell me in December what would be the dollar? 1.05, 1.20? That makes a hell of a difference for a scrap dealer in Europe, huh?
And let's face it, looking back this year, we're just in the fourth quarter, not even, but we had prices to begin with in the beginning of the year at a base price of 70, 80 euros a ton. And in the peak, we had 270 euros a ton. So a gap of 200 euros in less than 9 months, up and down. And now
You're
we
talking
are
D-bars now.
D-bars, yeah. So right now we are probably 130. So again, half of that is gone. So it's a huge volatility in one particular market, but a big market in Europe. So it's...
Well, you've got to have to pay attention that in the last maybe, I think in the last maybe 3 months, 90 days, the change, although the trend has been slightly given away, but the trend has been almost stable. So there probably is a reason for it.
Yeah.
So that's why maybe most of you are thinking it may be slightly down, but I noticed that not most, I mean, I didn't see many people saying that the price is going to be dramatically down.
That's why I would like to ask this gentleman, you put your hand saying that the price will go up substantially, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Is it just your stomach feeling, or is it...
I'm a scrap dealer.
Yeah, no, none of those. No, just the coke and coal price.
Can you switch on the microphone, please?
Is that on now?
Oh.
That's on? Well, I'll shout very loud. Purely coke and coal. So if coke and coal, when the price effect of spot coke and coal feeds through in about 3 months' time, that should send billet higher, which should send scrap higher in sympathy.
Okay.
So purely on the coke and coal spike alone, I think.
But do you foresee that the price for coke and coal will stay that high for a longer period?
Not necessarily for a long period, but for 3 months. Yeah, 2-3 months it can stay up here. As long as it's above 150, then billets are going to be sufficiently high that it will create an incentive to buy in scrap instead. So I think
Billets from iron ore, billets made of the blast furnace.
That's
billets.
right, yeah, so-
it's going to go up. So that makes sense.
If coke and coal's effectively more than doubled in price over the last couple of months, what's that in terms of the cost per ton of steel?
What, the coking coal?
Yeah,
$50, $60.
it's huge.
is the increase. Yeah.
Yes,
Is the actual...
you need, theoretically, you need, unless some expert believe I'm giving a wrong figure, but as far as I know, you need 0.4, let's say 400 kilos coking coal per ton of steel.
Okay.
So if you go from 80 to 220, you make your calculation. There is, even it's only 40%, of $140, this is a huge amount. Huh?
Yeah.
Does anyone here know why the coking coal went up that much? And is there any real economical reason behind it?
Is it not supply disruption in Australia?
Yeah.
From what I
Yeah, I
heard,
think
it's,
it's,
I don't know much, but
there was a big accident in Australia.
Yeah.
And from what I heard is also that in China, because of environmental issues and the last, what was it, a festival or whatever.
Yeah, they cannot produce, they have to reduce their daily production of coking coal.
Yeah, to stay within the CO2.
But that's a
limits.
huge
It's still
percentage increase.
a wish in China.
So that means the billet prices is going to go up.
Yeah, billet price is going up, and in replacement, people will buy scrap.
And the scrap will go up, then the rebar is going to go up. Well, hey,
Yeah, but okay, let's see. I don't think this, personally, I don't believe this would last 2 or 3 months, this go. But, okay.
Yeah, but also we proved through the second half of last year that the steel price isn't just defined by what it costs to make it, just like the scrap price isn't defined by what it costs to collect it.
Yeah.
And in an environment of overcapacity and overproduction, and going into lower demand season in Northern Hemisphere.
in a short time, you're right.
What's to say that scrap won't fall through?
In the short term, you're right, but in the long term,
Yeah.
no, it has a lot to do with it. I mean, short term, things change, and that doesn't directly affect the market. But in the long term, if it's not sustainable, it's not sustainable.
No.
Yeah, but it can take a long time for that to filter through the system. I mean, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. I mean,
Well, the steel mills, because I'm not at all in this business, are they making long-term contracts on coking coal?
No. As far as I know, it's all spot, but
No, spot not.
I
I
don't
heard 3 months. I don't know, huh?
does anybody know?
But I cannot guarantee that what I'm saying now is correct. Huh? It's just only what I heard.
I think we should all investigate that, because I have no idea.
Some people here in the IREPAS must know. Huh?
I hope so. The mills should know.
Well, at least those working from iron ore.
So that was the last question here from the table. Any other question from your side? Feel free to raise any. If this is not the case, then we say thank you very much for listening, for being here. Enjoy the rest of the IREPAS, and see you later at the gala. Thank you very much.
Thank you.